Listen, I know what you're thinking. Oh, great, another haunted house story. But what if I told you that the scariest thing about this place isn't what happened inside? Is that nobody can agree on whether it should even exist. Welcome to the nightmare that is the little house in Ontario, where the walls whisper secrets, the floors remember footsteps, and the real estate agent definitely didn't mention the previous tenants who never actually left. This isn't your typical ghost story with creaky doors and mysterious cold spots. Oh no. This is the tale of a house so disturbed, so fundamentally wrong, that even the skeptics who moved in left believing in things they swore they'd never believe in. And trust me, by the time we're done here, you'll be checking your own closets tonight. So buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to take a trip to rural Ontario, where the trees are tall, the winters are brutal, and one particular house has been playing host to the kind of party nobody wants an invitation to. Our story begins in 2003, which, let's be honest, was already a cursed year. Low-rise jeans were at their peak, and flip phones were somehow still cool. But in a small town about an hour outside of Ottawa, something far more sinister was brewing. The little house, and yes, that's literally what locals called it, because apparently creativity dies first in haunted towns, sat at the end of a gravel road that seemed to stretch on forever, flanked by dense forest on both sides. The house itself? Picture this, a modest two-story structure, white paint peeling like sunburned skin, black shutters hanging at angles that would make any level-obsessed person weep, and a front porch that sagged in the middle like it had given up on life. It was the kind of house you'd drive past and think, wow, someone should really do something about that, before immediately forgetting it existed. But here's where it gets interesting. The little house wasn't abandoned. It wasn't even old by Ontario standards. Built in 1967, which makes it practically a millennial in house years. And yet, it had already cycled through 17 different owners in 36 years. 17. That's a new owner every 2 years, give or take. Your average goldfish has better residential stability. Now, you might be thinking, maybe it just had plumbing issues. Oh, sweet summer child, if only it were that simple. But before we dive into the nightmare fuel, let me tell you about the family who actually tried to document what happened there, because apparently some people see a red flag and think it's a starting pistol. Enter the Morrison family in the fall of 2003. David, a high school history teacher with a beard that screamed, "I identify with Thoreau." His wife Jennifer, an emergency room nurse who'd seen some stuff and thought nothing could faze her anymore, and their 2 kids, 12-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Lucas, who were just thrilled about leaving their friends in Toronto for, and I quote, an adventure in the country. The real estate agent, let's call her Barbara, because she absolutely was a Barbara, showed them the property on a crisp October afternoon. The leaves were doing that picture-perfect autumn thing, all oranges and reds, and the price was so low it made David's calculator app crash. "It's a steal," Barbara chirped, her smile so wide you could see her molars. The previous owners had to relocate suddenly for work. Very motivated sellers. Red flag number 1. Nobody asked why 17 previous families all had sudden relocations. The house had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, because apparently the 60s didn't believe in having more than one toilet per household. A kitchen with original cabinets that were vintage if you were generous, and fire hazard if you were honest. And the basement. Oh, the basement. We'll get there. Trust me, we'll get there. So the Morrisons moved in on November 1st because apparently nobody told them that moving into a potentially cursed house on the day after Halloween is basically begging the universe to mess with you. The first week was actually normal-ish. The kind of normal where you unpack boxes, discover you own way too many spatulas, and argue about where the couch should go. David set up his home office in the spare bedroom. Jennifer worked night shifts at the hospital. The kids started at their new school and did that thing kids do, where they adapt way faster than adults because their brains are still plastic or whatever. But on day 8, things got weird. It started with the doors. Not slamming, that would have been too obvious. No, these doors had a more subtle approach to psychological torture. They'd be open when you swore you'd close them. Closed when you distinctly remembered leaving them open. It was like living with a passive-aggressive roommate who communicated exclusively through door positions. You left the basement door open again, Jennifer told David on a Tuesday morning, her nurse voice in full effect, the one that suggested you'd better have a good explanation or she'd take your temperature rectally just to make a point. I didn't go near the basement, David replied, not looking up from grading papers. Well, it didn't open itself. Narrator voice. It absolutely opened itself. Now, if you're thinking, okay, self-opening doors are creepy but not exactly demon-level scary, congratulations on your blissful ignorance. But hold on to your sage bundles, because we're just getting started. Emma was the first to hear the footsteps. This makes sense, because kids and animals are basically canaries in the coal mine when it comes to paranormal activity, except they can actually tell you about it instead of just dropping dead, which is arguably more helpful. It was 2:47 a.m. She knew because she checked her glow-in-the-dark alarm clock, which featured Hilary Duff's face, because 2003 was a lawless time. The footsteps came from above her room, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing, back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm was almost hypnotic. Here's the thing though, there was nothing above Emma's room except the attic. An attic they hadn't opened. An attic that, according to Barbara, the real estate agent, was just storage space, nothing interesting. When Emma mentioned it at breakfast the next morning, David did that parent thing where he dismissed it while simultaneously making a mental note to check it out. Because what if there's actually someone living in our attic? Oh God, oh God. He investigated that afternoon. The attic access was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, complete with one of those strings you yank on. David yanked. The ladder descended with a groan that sounded disturbingly biological. He climbed up, flashlight in hand, expecting... Honestly, he didn't know what he expected. What he found was an empty attic, completely empty. Not even the usual attic detritus. No forgotten Christmas decorations, no boxes labeled baby clothes will definitely use for the next kid, no inexplicable single shoes. Just bare wooden boards, thick dust, and the distinct feeling that he was being watched by something that didn't have eyes. David descended that ladder faster than a kid heading toward the ice cream truck. But here's where the Morrison family made their fatal mistake. And by fatal, I mean they should have packed up their boxes and burned rubber out of there. But instead, they did what every horror movie family does. They stayed. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence. Always the same time. Always the same pattern. Always from the empty attic that David had confirmed was, in fact, completely devoid of pacing ghosts or squatters or whatever logical explanation he was desperately clinging to. Then Lucas started talking about the man in the basement. Oh, you thought we'd forgotten about the basement? Adorable. Lucas mentioned him casually, the way kids mention things that would send adults into therapy for decades. The man in the basement says the house is angry. He announced over chicken nuggets on a Thursday evening. Jennifer's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What man, sweetie? The one in the brown coat. He stands at the bottom of the stairs. David and Jennifer exchange that look, the universal parent communication system that says, we need to talk about this later when the kids can't hear us have a complete meltdown. They checked the basement together that night. David went first, because despite all societal progress, we apparently still default to man investigates potential danger as our go-to strategy. The basement was typical Ontario basement material, concrete walls that smell that's part mildew and part what died down here in 1972, and a furnace that looked like it was held together by prayer and duct tape. No man in a brown coat. No man in any coat. No man, period. Now, at this point, a reasonable family would have called it quits. But the Morrisons weren't reasonable. They were stubborn, which is basically the same thing, except with worse decision-making skills. Jennifer, with her ER nurse pragmatism, decided there had to be a logical explanation. Carbon monoxide. She bought a detector. Faulty wiring causing hallucinations. David called an electrician. Some kind of mold making them all collectively lose their minds. She ordered an air quality test. Everything came back normal. The house, according to every professional they consulted, was fine. Perfectly fine. Nothing to see here. Just a regular house doing regular house things. Except regular houses don't make your family dog. A golden retriever named Biscuit, who was afraid of literally nothing, including the vacuum cleaner, refused to enter certain rooms. Regular houses don't make your breath visible in the middle of summer in one specific corner of the living room. Regular houses don't have a persistent smell of tobacco smoke, even though nobody in the family smoked, and they'd scrubbed every surface with enough cleaning products to qualify for a hazmat situation. Emma started keeping a journal. Being 12 and having grown up on a steady diet of mystery novels, she decided to document everything weird that happened. This journal would later become crucial, but at the time, it just seemed like typical preteen behavior, slightly melodramatic and overly detailed. Her entries painted a picture of escalating wrongness. November 15th. Door to my room was open again. I know I closed it. November 18th. Heard footsteps. Dad says it's house settling. Houses don't settle in the same pattern every night, Dad. November 22nd. Lucas won't stop talking about the basement man. Mom and Dad think he's making it up. He's not. I've seen shadows down there. November 29th. Something touched my hair while I was sleeping. I'm not crazy. And then December arrived, bringing with it snow, holiday cheer, and the kind of paranormal activity that would make even the Ghostbusters file for early retirement. The Morrison family tried to decorate for Christmas. Keyword, tried. Their tree, a perfectly normal 7-foot Fraser fir, refused to stay decorated. Ornaments would be on the floor every morning, not broken, just removed. Carefully removed and placed in a pile, like someone had methodically undecorated their tree overnight. Maybe Biscuit is doing it, Jennifer suggested, grasping at straws so desperately you could practically hear the desperation in her voice. Biscuit, sprawled on the couch, lifted his head as if to say, "Lady, I can't even reach the bottom branches, and you're blaming me for the ones on top." They set up a camera, because of course they did. This was 2003, so we're not talking about your fancy Ring doorbell or Nest Cam. This was a bulky camcorder positioned on a tripod, aimed at the Christmas tree, recording to mini DV tapes that David had to buy at Radio Shack, like some kind of analog caveman. The footage from the first night was, let's call it inconclusive if you're in denial, and absolutely horrifying if you're honest with yourself. At 3:17 a.m., the ornaments started moving, not falling, moving. They'd slide up the branches, detach, float, and yes, I said float, as in defy gravity in a way that would make Newton weep, across the room, and settle gently on the floor in a neat pile. There was no wire, no strings, no rational explanation that didn't involve accepting that something in the house really, really hated their interior decorating choices. David watched that footage 17 times. Jennifer watched it once, said, "Nope," and walked away. Emma and Lucas weren't allowed to see it, though Emma definitely snuck a peek and wrote in her journal, "We need to leave," like yesterday. But leaving wasn't simple, because nothing about the little house was simple. The Morrisons had sunk their savings into this place, and the housing market in 2003 Ontario wasn't exactly hopping. They were stuck, financially, emotionally, and apparently supernaturally. Christmas Day was when things went from unsettling to we're living in a horror movie and nobody gave us the script. The family gathered for dinner, turkey, stuffing, the works. David carved the bird with the confidence of a man refusing to acknowledge his house was haunted. They sat down, said grace, which, in retrospect, probably couldn't hurt, and started eating. The lights went out, not flickered, not dimmed, just straight to black, like someone had flipped a switch that controlled every electrical outlet in the house simultaneously. "Circuit breaker," David announced with false confidence, pulling out his phone for light. Remember, 2003 phones had approximately 3 hours of battery life, and flashlight apps weren't a thing. So he was basically working with a dim screen and hope. He headed to the basement, because of course the circuit breaker was in the basement. Where else would it be? Conveniently located on the main floor. That would be too easy. Jennifer called after him, "Take Biscuit." Biscuit, sitting firmly in the living room, looked at Jennifer with an expression that clearly said, "I'd rather eat your burnt Brussels sprouts than go near that basement." David descended alone. The basement stairs creaked under his weight, each step announcing his presence to whatever was down there. His phone screen cast weird shadows on the concrete walls, making ordinary objects look like crouching figures. The circuit breaker box was fine, every switch in the correct position, but the light stayed off, and then David heard it, breathing that wasn't his own, coming from the corner where Lucas insisted the man in the brown coat stood. He ran. David Morrison, high school history teacher, man who'd once given a 40-minute lecture on the importance of facing one's fears, ran up those basement stairs like he was being chased by every demon in the infernal phone book. The lights came back on when he reached the top. Just like that. Click. Illumination. The turkey sitting on the table as if nothing had happened. After Christmas, Jennifer put her foot down. Not about moving, they still couldn't afford that, but about getting answers. If the house wanted to play games, fine. But she was going to find out why. She started digging into the property's history, which was surprisingly difficult considering it wasn't even 40 years old. The local library, because this was before you could Google your way through every mystery, had limited records. The previous owners were impossible to track down. It was like they'd all vanished into thin air after selling the place. Finally, Jennifer found Mrs. Kowalski, an elderly woman who'd lived in the area her entire life and had a memory sharper than most people's filing systems. Oh, the little house, Mrs. Kowalski said, recognition lighting up her face in a way that definitely wasn't comforting. You live there now. God help you. Always what you want to hear. Mrs. Kowalski explained that the house had been built on what was previously farmland, purchased from a local family in 1966. The construction was rushed. Apparently, the builder wanted it done before winter, which, if you know anything about Ontario winters, means they were cutting corners faster than a NASCAR driver. But here's the kicker. During excavation for the foundation, they found something. A small family cemetery, unmarked and unrecorded, dating back to the early 1800s. 6 graves, including 2 children. The builder, being a pragmatic businessman with zero respect for the supernatural or basic decency, decided to simply build over it. No relocation of remains, no acknowledgement, just concrete and foundation, and a house plopped right on top of people's final resting place. Every family that's lived there has had problems, Mrs. Kowalski said, pouring tea with hands that shook slightly. Strange sounds, objects moving, children talking about people who aren't there. And they all leave within a few years. Some leave faster than others. Jennifer asked what happened to the families who left fastest. Mrs. Kowalski's expression darkened. The ones who didn't respect the house, who tried to fight it, who refused to acknowledge what was there. She leaned in, her voice dropping. The house doesn't like being ignored. Armed with this information, Jennifer returned home to find David researching property law with the kind of intensity usually reserved for cramming for finals. Spoiler alert, you can't sue a ghost, and there's no legal precedent for my house is built on top of a cemetery, and the former residents are really upset about it. Emma's journal entries from January were increasingly desperate. January 3rd, something grabbed Lucas's ankle when he was getting out of bed. He has bruises. January 8th, I saw the man in the brown coat. Lucas isn't making him up. He's real. He's sad. January 14th, Mum found out about the cemetery. Nobody will talk about it. We're all pretending everything is fine. It's not fine. January 19th. I tried talking to them, the ghosts. I told them we're sorry about what happened. I don't know if they heard me. Lucas stopped sleeping in his room. He'd drag his blankets into his parents' bedroom every night, curling up on the floor like a much younger child. He didn't talk about the man in the brown coat anymore. He didn't talk much at all. Biscuit developed a bald patch from anxious licking. The vet said it was stress. The vet had no idea. David's beard started going grey, which would have been distinguished on a man in his 40s, but was significantly less charming on someone who just turned 33. And Jennifer, practical nurse Jennifer, who'd seen people die and held families as they grieved and never flinched, she started flinching at every sound. February brought a blizzard that trapped the Morrisons in the little house for 3 days straight. No school, no work, no escape. Just 5 humans, 1 dog, and whatever else was living in that house, all forced into close quarters like the world's worst reality show. On the second day of the blizzard, Emma decided she'd had enough. She'd been reading about ghosts, actual research, not just creepypasta and forum posts. And everything she read suggested the same thing: communication. So she did something either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, depending on your perspective. She went to the basement, alone, with a flashlight, a notebook, and the kind of determination that only a 12-year-old can muster. "I know you're here," she said to the empty basement, her breath fogging in the cold. "And I know you're angry. But we didn't do this. We didn't build the house on top of you. We didn't even know you were here." Silence. Just the hum of the furnace and her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "If you want us to know something, you need to tell us. I'm listening." The light bulb above her head flickered once, twice, then shattered, plunging her into darkness except for her flashlight beam. Emma didn't run. Points for courage, minus points for survival instinct. "Please," she whispered, "just tell us what you need." In her journal later, she wrote that she felt something shift in the air, like the house took a breath it had been holding for decades. And then she heard it, a voice, quiet and sad, speaking directly into her mind rather than her ears. "Remember us." That was it. 2 words. Simple, devastating, profound. Remember us. Emma told her family what happened. David was furious that she'd gone to the basement alone. Jennifer was terrified that whatever was in the house was now directly communicating with their daughter. Lucas just nodded, like he'd known all along that talking to the ghosts was the answer. They held a family meeting, a real one, not the kind where parents pretend to ask for input while having already made the decision. They talked about options. They talked about money. They talked about their safety and their sanity, and whether either of those things could survive another month in the little house. And then Jennifer had an idea. If the ghosts wanted to be remembered, then they'd be remembered. Properly, respectfully, publicly. She contacted the local historical society. She called the regional government. She wrote to everyone she could think of, explaining what they'd discovered about the cemetery. She demanded, politely, because she was Canadian, but firmly, that something be done. It took weeks of bureaucracy, paperwork, and the kind of persistent phone calls that would make a telemarketer proud. But eventually, they got approval. The province would fund a memorial. a recognition of the unmarked graves, a historical plaque acknowledging the families buried there. The ceremony was scheduled for March 15th. The weird thing was that once the decision was made, once the house knew it would be acknowledged, things calmed down. Not completely. The occasional footstep still echoed, doors still opened mysteriously, but the aggressive energy faded. It was like the house itself sighed in relief. The memorial ceremony was small but meaningful. A local historian spoke about the early settlers in the area. A pastor said a few words, covering all denominations, because nobody was quite sure what the buried families had believed in. The Historical Society installed a bronze plaque near the house's foundation, listing the 6 known graves and acknowledging the countless unknown others who'd settled this land. Emma read a statement she'd written. To the families who rest beneath this ground, we see you. We remember you. Your lives mattered, and your resting place should never have been disturbed. We're sorry it took so long for someone to say this. David cried. Jennifer cried. Lucas held Biscuit's leash and didn't cry because 8-year-old boys don't cry at public events, but his eyes were suspiciously shiny. That night, for the first time since November, the house was silent, completely, peacefully silent. No footsteps, no doors, no cold spots or tobacco smell or floating Christmas ornaments. Emma wrote in her journal, I think they heard us. I think they forgive us. The Morrisons stayed in the little house for 3 more years. Not because they were stuck, though the finances were still tight, but because they'd made peace with it. Or rather, they'd helped the house make peace with itself. They continued to maintain the memorial, placing flowers on the anniversary of the ceremony each year. Emma did a school project on the early settlers buried beneath their home, winning a regional history competition. Lucas eventually started sleeping in his own room again, though he always said goodnight to the man downstairs, who he insisted was named Thomas and just wanted company. David later admitted that he never quite got comfortable in the house, but he respected it. It's like living with a roommate who has a tragic past, he said. You give them space, you acknowledge their pain, and you try not to eat their labeled food in the fridge. Jennifer became an advocate for proper cemetery protection laws in Ontario, because apparently nearly dying of fright in your own home will turn you into an activist. And the house itself, it still stood there, white paint still peeling, black shutters still crooked, front porch still sagging. But it was different, calmer, like a person who'd finally been heard after years of screaming into the void. In 2006, the Morrisons moved back to Toronto. David got a department head position at his old school. Jennifer transferred to a hospital with better hours. Emma headed to high school, and Lucas started middle school. They sold the little house for significantly more than they'd paid, because a property with a documented historical memorial is apparently worth more than one with just mystery bruises and floating ornaments. The new owners were warned about everything. The real estate agent, a different one. Barbara, having retired to somewhere without haunted houses, was legally required to disclose the property's history after Jennifer's advocacy work. The new family went in with eyes open, sage bundles ready, and a healthy respect for the ground beneath their foundation. As far as anyone knows, they're still there, still maintaining the memorial, still acknowledging the families beneath. And the little house, for the first time in its existence, seems content. Emma, now an adult with kids of her own, still has her journal from that year. She's written in the last page, years later. We were scared. We thought we were losing our minds. But in the end, all those people wanted was what everyone wants: to be remembered, to matter, to have their existence acknowledged. It's not the dead we should fear. It's forgetting that they were ever alive. So here's the thing about the little house in Ontario. It's not a story about evil spirits or demonic possession or any of that Hollywood nonsense. It's a story about what happens when we build our lives on top of other people's deaths without a second thought. It's about respect, acknowledgement, and the very human need to be remembered. Did the Morrisons imagine everything? Were they experiencing collective hallucination brought on by stress, financial anxiety, and carbon monoxide they didn't detect? Maybe. Science would certainly prefer that explanation. It's cleaner, easier, doesn't require us to rethink our understanding of reality. But here's what I know. 17 families left that house before the Morrisons. 17 families who experienced similar events, similar fear, similar desperation. And after the memorial was placed, after the ceremony acknowledging the dead beneath the foundation, the house changed. The pattern broke. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe sometimes the dead just want what we all want: to be seen, heard, and remembered. The little house still stands today, occupied by a family who tends the memorial with care. The bronze plaque is polished regularly. Flowers appear on the anniversary every March 15th. And according to neighbors, the house is quiet now, peaceful, almost like it's finally resting. Now, if you made it this far, congratulations. You've survived the tale of the little house in Ontario. If you're now looking around your own home wondering what's buried beneath it, well, that's what Wikipedia and county records are for. You're welcome for the paranoia. But real talk for a second. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's something profound about acknowledging the lives that came before us. Every piece of ground we walk on, every building we occupy, every space we call ours, it belonged to someone else first. Indigenous peoples, early settlers, families who lived and died and disappeared from memory. Maybe the little house wasn't haunted by ghosts. Maybe it was haunted by guilt, by the collective shame of knowing we'd built something on top of people who deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, all it took to lift that weight was acknowledgement, respect, remembrance. Or maybe I'm getting too philosophical and you just came here for spooky content. Which is fair. I respect that. If you enjoyed this story, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button, because apparently I have a whole mental catalogue of Canadian haunted houses, and I need an outlet for this information before it consumes me entirely. Leave a comment telling me if you've ever experienced anything weird in your home. And I mean actually weird, not just my roommate doesn't wash dishes weird. Though honestly, that's pretty horrifying too. Drop a like if you think building houses on top of cemeteries should maybe not be a thing we do. Just putting that out there. And if you're currently living in a house with unexplained phenomena, maybe check the property records. Just saying. Could save you a lot of sleepless nights and therapy bills. Thanks for watching. And remember, the dead don't want to hurt you. They just want to be remembered. Though, if your Christmas ornaments start floating, maybe call a priest anyway. Better safe than sorry. Stay spooky, stay skeptical, and for the love of all that's holy, respect the ground you walk on. You never know who's underneath. Until next time, assuming the algorithm doesn't bury this video like the little house buried its secrets, I'll see you in the comments, or in your nightmares, whichever comes first.